Good morning and good evening, listeners, those who are watching from India. This is Manan Rawal, and we have second episode from legendary Dr. Jay Bansal ji. He is a scientist, a turner writer, community leader, and keen student of Indian civilization history. If you have seen the last episode, we have given all the details extensively over there, and it was in 5 6 digit viewership and was great success. So we invited him today again. So just giving his little bit more brief on what he does and what he is. He has written extensively on the subject of given talks on the international platform, most recently at G20 Reframe Forum on September 2022. He retired as a chief scientist officer from the major petrochemical company in 2014. He subsequently served as a distinguished fellow at the Oregon National Lab in Chicago for 4 years, as well as an advisor to the US Department of Energy. He is currently devoting his entire free time to Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, and he is on the core team as well as he is the VP of Education, and he is pretty much having a command on Hinduism history, and he write and study extensively. He does a lot of research, and here we would like to invite him for the second episode. Good morning,
Thank you.
sir. Namaste.
Thank you again. Namaskar, and a very warm greeting to all your viewers.
Thank you, sir. Sir, so today we are going to discuss on revisiting our civilization history and why it is important, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, are you okay? We can start recording, sir?
Are you asking me? Yes, of course, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So we can start our interview, right?
Okay, just make the shot a little bit tighter. Just get a little bit closer. My so blank out some of the details on the side, please. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, please. Let's do that first.
So you want me to introduce you again?
No, no, no. You can cut out this portion. That's all. But just make the shot a little bit tighter. That's all.
Okay. So we will edit that part.
Okay, no, that's fine. What I'm saying is just make this, get zoom in a little bit on me so that some of the, the my some of the stuff in my room doesn't show on the screen.
It looks nice, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay,
Your
if you
background, you are talking about your background, right?
yeah, exactly.
No, no, no.
If
It
you
is good. It will
okay,
be
all right.
natural look.
Okay, all right, that's fine. So, do you want to cut out? I mean, edit out this portion, or you want to reintroduce me?
No, no, no. We will edit this.
Okay, all right, no problem. So, just tell me when to start. Go ahead. Go ahead. Ask your question now. Okay.
Ready? One, two, three. So we were just discussing about last time. We were just discussing about the revisiting our civilization history and why it is important. This is the topic today, viewers, and we are going to learn why we have to revisit our civilization. So, sir, my first question is: there are a lot of people who says why we should be revisiting our ancient history and why it is important to know what happened 1,000 years ago or even 200 years ago. Why not just accept current reality and move on?
Yes, so that actually, Manan Bhai, is a very important and interesting question, and I've come across that question many times before in my talks. I was going to cover it towards the end of my presentation, but I think it's important for us to do it perhaps in the beginning, so people understand why it is important for them to know what is going, what happened to them, and why it is important for us to have these kind of conversations. So let's remember that we have been under two different colonial regimes for more than 1,200 years. Uh, these colonizers, you see, colonizers are never nice people. Their job is to take from you what is not theirs. So how do they do it? They do it by two means. They have two different weapons at their choice, at their disposal. The first weapon is brute force, which they have used very frequently. They use it everywhere, and we can spend a lot of time talking about how much damage that has done to our civilization. However, there is even a more insidious weapon that's available to them, and that is the capacity to erase your civilizational history. So the natural consequence of that is that over time we begin to believe the colonizer's narrative, and and we lost confidence in our ability. As a civilization, we lost the ability to believe that we could accomplish anything of significance. Because presumably we never had a history of accomplishing anything of importance, because that's what we were led to believe. Now, the problem is that, after 76 years after independence, we still haven't been able to get rid of that mentality. Still, by and large, we are mentally colonized. And this problem is more with the so-called intellectual class, people who have gone through English education, particularly in more modern times. They just seem to think that this is our capability. This is who we are. We are not as good as the Western world, because that's what we've been told. So, you end up hating the way you dress, the way you eat, the way you talk, the way you relate to people. In all sorts of ways, you develop this inferiority complex in your mind. So when you have this inferiority complex, it holds you back as a civilization, as a people, as a society. You can only be thinking of very short term things. Making money, getting a good job, getting progressing educationally and professionally, and so on and so forth. But you're not thinking of your imagination becomes limited, and your ability to create becomes limited. Now, let me give you some examples. The first example actually comes from Ramayana.
Oh,
These days, where Ram Mandir, as you know, Ram Mandir inauguration is almost 3 days away. So I think it's a good example for people to take away. It's about Shri Hanuman and his companions going out in search of Sita ji. They know where she is. They finally find out where she is, but they have to cross a large body of water, the ocean, and in order to get to her. Now, the mighty Hanuman, however, faces this moment of despondency, because due to a childhood curse, he doesn't remember that he's, all powerful. So he says, how are we going to accomplish this task? This is such a large body of water. Until his friend Jamwant reminds him that he's almighty, he's able to accomplish all these wonderful things because he has this strength. And suddenly he remembers, and he's able to accomplish something that he just a minute ago he thought was impossible. See, that is the power of knowing your capabilities, power of knowing that you're able to accomplish these things. Now, another example I'll give you, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but another example I'll give you is also very interesting. There was an experiment done in Harvard University in early 1950s by a fellow named Kurt Richter. It's a very brutal experiment, as I'll explain in a second, which probably would not be allowed in today's world. But you can Google it under something called Hope Experiment, HOPE experiment. Anyway, what Richter did was he took a laboratory mouse and threw it in the jar of water. Okay, now mouse, of course, tried to come out of the water, struggled for a period of time, and after 15 minutes or so, it exhausted and it drowned. Now, Richter repeated the experiment with the second mouse. He threw the mouse in the water, and of course, the same thing happened. The mouse tried to come out. 15 minutes or so, it was about to drown, but this time Richter pulled it out, and it dried the mouse, let him rest for a few minutes, and threw it back in the jar of water. Now the mouse kept trying and trying and trying, but this time what happened was the mouse tried for much longer time. Guess how long he tried to come out of the water? He put up this fight for 60 hours.
Oh,
Imagine, the first mouse died in 15 minutes. The second mouse kept trying for 60 hours because he had the hope of being rescued. See, that is the power of hope, confidence, positive thinking. And that is what we need as a society. And the only way you can get that is by understanding who you are as a people, as a civilization, what your capabilities are, what you've accomplished. So that's the reason, Maran Bhai, I feel that it's important for us to have these conversations and know our reality as a civilization.
yep.
Okay, with that, if I may ask you to load the slides for me, or can I do it myself?
You can do it by yourself.
Okay, all right. So where are the four slides? Let me start here.
Yeah.
So uh, on to the subject at hand. It's about revisiting our civilizational history and why it matters, as we said earlier. Now, as I look at our civilizational history and what has happened to it over, this 1,000, 1,200 period of colonization, I think the topic really should be called revisiting the distortions of our civilizational history. Because we had a certain history, and it has been taken up by others and distorted it out completely out of recognition, to a
Yep.
point where what is being taught to us, what we learn in schools, colleges, or through media and so on and so forth, is just about everything in there is written by others and written from their point of view, and hugely wrongly. So that's where we are. So now the thing is, if we're going to talk about distortions of our history, then first thing we need to have a baseline. What is it that we actually were that ultimately got distorted? So this is a big topic. It can be you can talk about so many different things, but I'll just talk about a couple of things on this slide. So we know that for the longest time, we had the pre-Islamic era. The Indian civilization was flourishing, and then Islam started coming in at the beginning of the 8th century. 712 is when Muhammad bin Qasim attacked Sindh, and then slowly, Islamic invaders kept coming in and ultimately gained strength, and they were there ruling us for long period of time until the British replaced them. British came in the early part of the 17th century, and then in the middle of last century, 20th century, they were politely asked to go. So we have suffered these two bouts of very brutal and very consequential, colonial periods. Now, what has happened during that period? You see, we were a global leader in production of knowledge, and I'll show some examples of that for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Now, once the Islamic era started, our institutions, our educational institutions, our way of life was hugely disrupted, destroyed by brutal attacks, and by the time the Islamic era was towards its end, our knowledge production was barely functional. We were just trying to survive as a people, as a society. Okay, that became the main priority. But then the British came and they destroyed whatever was left of it, to the point where when they left in 1947, our knowledge production was basically dysfunctional. We had a literacy rate of 12%
Wow.
in 1947. Now today it's gone up to, I think, 70% plus. I've heard figures like close to 80%. So we've recovered a lot of it, but what we haven't recovered is frankly our what we're teaching our kids. We may teach more kids. We are able to, have a high literacy rate, but what we're teaching is still the old colonial narrative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, the second thing is in terms of the material wealth. You see, at the start of our common era, so-called ground zero, India accounted for one third of the world's GDP. It was why, India and China were two largest economies in the world. China was less than India, but here we are, one third of world's economy. By the time Islamic era was coming to a close, it had gone down to 25%. And the reason, it was still at 25% is because, after the early invaders, the Mughals basically stayed there, and the wealth stayed in the country for the most part, although it was not distributed, ideally from Hindu point of view, but wealth still stayed in the country. So it was, had gone down to about 25%. Now, what is interesting is when the British took over, and they were only there for less than 200 years, 190 years, more or less, the share of India's GDP of the world was less than 3%. So, a tremendous destruction of material wealth as well as our ability to produce knowledge had been destroyed. But that's where we had been strong in historically, knowledge producers and materially strong. I mean, you cannot have a 33% of world's GDP without being, without having intellectual property, without being able to produce knowledge. So let me give you some examples of why we believe we were knowledge-based society. I have three or four quotes here from different historians, and these are actually Western historians. Here's James Duff. He's a British historian in the I guess in the late 18th century to the mid 19th century, and he says many of the advances in science that we consider as European were in fact made in India centuries ago. Then we have a French astronomer, this fellow Jean Sylvain Bailly. He says the motion of the stars calculated by the Hindus some 4,500 years ago vary not even a single minute from the tables of Cassini and Mayer. These are astronomers from I guess the Western Europe. So 4,500 years ago, we were able to map the motion of the stars that the Europeans were only trying to map in last couple of centuries. Then we have Will Durant. He is a famous American historian, and he says India was the motherland of much of our mathematics. And I have a brief quote here from Dharampal's book called The Beautiful Tree. This is actually, he quotes a number of British reports from early 1800s. And he says from these reports, the quote is the mass education in the early 1800s was more advanced and widespread in India compared to England. So clearly, we were educationally very advanced. Now, when you are educationally so advanced, when you are, able to think for yourself, how does colonizer control you? Here I put an example here of how do you tame an elephant? I mean, we were the elephant, in this case. So how was the colonizer able to tame us? And the answer is very short. Make the elephant believe that he's actually not an elephant, he's just a sheep. See, you have to play with the mind of the elephant somehow to make sure it doesn't rebel against you. Okay.
Yeah.
Now there is another example. We have George Orwell. He's a famous journalist and historian, and he makes this very interesting statement. He says, to destroy a people, you have to obliterate their understanding of their history. Once you confuse them about their history, basically they become a slave society, the mentally slave society. And frankly, British were so good at it that they did a marvelous job of confusing us. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about what the what the Islamic rulers did to us, but right now I'm just going to focus on the British period.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's where I think a tremendous amount of our our civilizational history got totally messed up. So in order for us to understand what was going on, how the colonization took place and what their mindset was, I have to take you and your viewers to the 15th century Europe. A very brief primer on that part of the history. So during this period, Catholic Church was the ultimate authority. Their word was God's word. They interpreted the Bible, and they told people what was right, what was wrong, and people had no reason to believe otherwise. So they basically accepted Church's word. Now, according to the Church and whatever they were teaching people, the creation of the world took place on a particular day, October 23rd, 4004 BCE. So about 6,000 years ago. Now, then there was a great flood that took place in 2349 BCE, where the whole world was destroyed. But Noah, built this boat, big boat, and he carried, a male and female of every species, which then ultimately populated the earth. This is the view of human evolution or evolution of the world. Now, then there was something called this mosaic race theory. See, Noah had three sons who ultimately populated the earth. This fellow named Japheth, he populated Europe, and Shem, he populated Middle East, and Ham, he populated Africa and Asia and the rest of the world. Now, what happened was apparently this last son, Ham, he managed to insult his father, Noah. And Noah cursed him. He said, well, you will always be slave to your brothers, two brothers, and your sons will be slave to their sons, and so on and so forth forever. So now this is the mindset Europeans are in. We are the sons of Ham. Our only function in life is to be slave to the progeny of the other two brothers, the Europeans and the Middle Eastern. This is the this is the worldview that Europe had in the 15th century. Now
Oh,
things change. Interesting. Okay, so they own the world. Church says, the Christian world owns the whatever is in the world, and so this is what church is telling the people. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V, he came up with this edict called the Doctrine of Discovery. It's a very famous document. It was only rescinded back, I think, in 2022 or 2023, believe it or not, more than 500 years later. So
yeah,
it's a big document, but let me just read a few words from this document. It says, go invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. Now, Saracens are the Arabs, and pagans are everyone else who does not follow the rules of Christianity. So this document from the Pope is telling them to, Europeans to go invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all these people, and then do what with them? To reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. And the last sentence, to convert them to his and their use and profit. So, this is the edict from the church to the Europeans to go find people who are not following the path of Christianity, take their property, convert them, and enslave them. So, of course, that's what they did. In the during this period, Spain and Portugal were the most dominant empires in Europe. So they are going out. They are, probing the west coast of Africa, and they are enslaving the people, taking, and colonizing Africa. And of course, they are looking for sea route to Bharat, because during this period, Constantinople, which used to be the land route for trade between India and Europe, had been closed out, because the Ottoman Empire had taken over, and they had put all sorts of trade restrictions. So they were searching out for sea route, and as we know, in 1492, Columbus, representing Spain, he was looking for India, but then he found America, and he claimed all of Americas for Spain. And a few years later, Vasco da Gama, from Portugal, he went around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, and found Indian Ocean, India, and he laid claim to all of Africa, all of Asia, and the Indian Ocean for Portugal. Now, they have this, competition between these going on. So Pope Alexander the Sixth steps in to to settle the claim between these two parties. So there is a famous document. I forget the name of the document. In that document, he drew this red line on the map, and he said, "Okay, the east of this red line belongs to Portugal, and the west of this line belongs to Spain. And please stop fighting now." Okay. Now Portuguese were not very happy with this. They thought they deserved a little bit more. So a year later, he moved this line a little bit to the west, to this green line, and he said,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay, Portugal, you can have a little bit more, and Spain, you have a lot of territory already, so be happy with it." Now, this is the reason, as a matter of fact, why this part of South America is Portuguese. This is Brazil. Okay, everywhere else in South America, it's a Spanish speaking territory, whereas this little portion is Portuguese territory. Okay,
Oh, okay.
so that's the history behind what happened. But so let me now take you to the Indian context. But the point is, this is how they were dividing up the world between these two powers. Now, while Spain and Portugal are, robbing these colonies of their wealth, gold and all the minerals and all the natural wealth, and enslaving people, the other folks, whether it's the English or the French and all these other Europeans, the Italians, and, whatever have you, they are watching them with envy. But they're not able to do anything, because that's what Pope is told Europe to do. He divided the world between these two powers. However, things changed. In 1517, Martin Luther revolted against the Catholic Church, and the Reformation movement started, and that is when Protestant faith came into existence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a lot of the countries in Europe, they broke away from the Catholic Church, and they adopted this new faith, the Protestant faith. And countries like England, France, and many others, they basically now were free of the Catholic Church, so they were able to go and explore on their own.
Yeah.
And that is what started the pan-European campaign to conquer the world, to to take their wealth away for the benefit of the European world. So now they are starting to explore. So now here we are in the Indian context. As you know, the Portuguese, they colonized Goa and the west coast from 1498 onwards. But I'm going to focus, and then French came, and even Dutch were there for some period of time and all that. But let's skip all this and talk about the British era. In 1608, the first ship of British East India Company docked in Surat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they obtained the rights to trade between between East India Company and India. I think at that time, I think Jahangir was the Mughal king, so he gave them permission to trade and all that, and they started building their facilities, their warehouses all along the first along the west coast, then along the east coast. Ultimately, they had huge presence in what is now known as Calcutta. The Fort William was established. So they had these warehouses for trading, and in order to protect, they also have certain amount of military presence now. So they started, now that they have military presence, they started interfering in local affairs, in politics, and so on and so forth. And the next big episode that happened was in 1757, the Battle of Plassey. This is the first time British, sided with the with the winning party, and they were able to establish foothold in eastern part of Bharat, in Bengal. Now, over the next 100 years, they kept expanding their reach. They took over many territories slowly. So they went all the way, from east to west, north to south. Ultimately, in 1857, the Indian population rose against them in the First War of Independence, which unfortunately the British held their ground. They were managed to beat back the revolutionaries, and they gained political control of all of Bharat. The Bharat was ultimately taken over by at this point was taken over in 1858 by the British Crown. So the control passes from the East India Company to the British Crown. Now, after the Battle of Plassey, once British got foothold in India, they felt they needed to understand these people that they were going to rule. They so in order so this is established institutions to understand our our texts, our customs, our languages, and so on and so forth. In 1784, the first Asiatic Society was formed in Calcutta to study our Sanskrit texts. And a fellow named William Jones was, he learned Sanskrit and started doing research, and he found some very interesting connections between Sanskrit and many European languages, including Greek and Latin. And in 1786, he published his famous paper. Actually, I would say that William Jones was very appreciative of Sanskrit language. Okay, I have a copy of his original paper, and he's very effusive about how beautiful Sanskrit is. And he made the statement that Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin are related, but Sanskrit is much more advanced than any of the other languages. Now, this lit a fire in Europe. All of a sudden, everyone was interested in knowing more about this newfound language and what their connection was, and how that connection came into existence. So the study of linguistics and Indic subjects became a very hot field in Europe. There were many, it goes under many different names like Oriental studies, Asiatic studies, Southeast Asian studies, comparative religious studies, and Indology. And many thousands of our Sanskrit texts were shipped to Europe and were translated in local languages and analyzed very deeply. There were many Asiatic societies formed. I have a list of some of them here. The Asiatic Society of Calcutta in 1784. There was a French society in 1812. British Royal Society 1824, even American Oriental Society was formed in 1842, and Germans formed their Asiatic Society, Oriental Society in 1845. So, you know, dozens of universities are studying this literature. Chairs established. A lot of people are working on it. I have put some pictures here. I don't want to spend too much time talking about each one of them, but names like Schlegel, Larson, Hegel, Holzman, von Garbe. Max Muller is very famous. People don't know how much damage Max Muller has done to us, but you know they think he was a great Sanskrit scholar. And unfortunately, the baton has been picked up by modern so-called scholars of Indology, people like Wendy Doniger from Chicago, Sheldon Pollock from Columbia University, and Michael Witzel at Harvard. So these people are carrying on the same work that their ancestors in Europe, particularly in Germany, were doing. Now, what was the motivation for all this study? It wasn't to appreciate the Hindu, art or Hindu literature. It was simply this. See, they were convinced in their mind that Hindus were primitive sons of Ham. So, how could they possibly have developed this advanced language?
Yeah.
Okay, so they really wanted to find out where did this language come from, and they believed in their mind it had to be Europeans because they were the most advanced people in the world, so it had to be theirs. But how did it get to India? So that was their problem. That's what they were trying to study. Now, let's come to 1800s, and you know talk about the English education. Now some brainwashing is going to happen of our society. So here we have Thomas Monroe, who is the governor of Madras Presidency, one of the three or four large presidencies, English presidencies that existed at that time. He's sending this report in 1826 to British government, where he says mass education in the early 1800s was more advanced and widespread in India compared to England. And he says every village had a school, and 65% of students were Shudras. This may come as a surprise to a lot of your audience. Now, in the same time frame, you have Thomas Macaulay. He is speaking in the British Parliament in 1835, and I'll just give you three quotes from his talk. He says, "A single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India." Okay, a single shelf of good European library was better than what was, contained in the native literature of India, while Thomas Monroe is telling them how great our education system was.
Yeah.
This is in 1835. He's writing this report in 1826, only 9 years difference.
Yeah.
Now, so clearly, one of them is lying, and guess who's lying? Um, Then he says, Macaulay says, to form a class of persons, that is his objective, to form a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. And then he makes a very interesting statement, which I think is very true. He says, no Hindu who has received an English education ever continues to be sincerely attached to his traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. I mean, in many ways, he was right. Many Hindus have been able to stay attached to their traditions, but majority of Hindus have become very distant from their traditions as a result of the English education. So, in 1835 and thereabouts, English education was imposed on us. And question is, why does it matter? We all benefited from English education, and I sound like a bit of a hypocrite talking about bad mouthing English education while we're talking in English ourselves today. But that's a different conversation. We should have that conversation at some point. But let's talk about what English education did to the Indian society. You see, uh, it immediately created a divide between those who were good and proficient in English and those who were not proficient in English. So those who studied English and became proficient in it, they became part of the elite class. They dressed like the British, they spoke like the British, they even sometimes ate, food that British people ate, and they, attended their, social parties, although they were not always welcome, but, they tried to associate with the British society, and they call themselves the elite class, the Bhadra Lok.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
Whereas the lack of English proficiency became equated to backwardness. If you couldn't speak English well, you were just an ordinary, backward person. And more importantly, you see, it became an entry ticket for high-end career jobs. So, of course, everyone wants to now learn English because that's the only way you can get a good job and move forward in the world. So it created a huge divide in the society. Now, the second thing is it arrested the transmission of our civilization narrative. Now, what I mean by that is, you see, language is not just a way to communicate. Language is also the way we carry our traditions. We communicate our traditions to the next generation. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so, for example, when you're going to learn English, you're going to learn about Shakespeare and Shelley and Byron and so on and so forth. You're not going to learn or appreciate Kalidas, Bhabhuti, Kautilya. So, so your traditions, your knowledge gets suppressed because the language of communication, the language of education is not your native language. Um, and then there is loss of civilizational pride. You're learning in someone else's language. You don't know your own accomplishments, what your forefathers did, all the wonderful progress they made. So why should you be proud of your civilization? And it arrested the creativity of our people because, see, creativity requires free thinking. You have to be able to think in many different spheres and connect the dots to come up with something new and different. And once you are thinking in a foreign language, that ability to think freely goes away. So it arrested our creativity. We became basically survivors. Okay. So that is the power of having a foreign language imposed on you. Now, there are two or three other steps that were used to brainwash the Indian society. So, the next step is the invention of this Aryan race theory. You see, I don't know how many people are aware, but in 1800s, Germany was not a country.
Oh, okay.
German people were basically they were living in tribes in Germanic lands, and they were fighting with each other and with the Catholic Church. But slowly, the thought was starting to build that we have something in common. The language is common, culture is common. Let's create a country. So in 1871, they finally created the country. But in this time frame, they were trying to develop a national identity, understand what was common, what should they be proud of. And in this period they came across Mahabharata, but they also came across, of course, our Vedas and other scriptural texts, but specifically Mahabharata became an object of their study, and out of which they developed this Aryan race theory. So, what is Aryan race theory? They said, well, actually, Indo Germanic people share a common ancestry. So, people of India and people of Germanic background, they have a common ancestry. So, what is the common ancestry? Well, there was a white race that came from somewhere in Eurasia, somewhere. It had Europe had to be part of it. You see, without Europe, nothing works, right? In their mind. So, it was the white race who came from Eurasia and they spoke Sanskrit. It was their language. Now, the eastern branch of these people, they went to India and they got mixed in with the dark tribal people of India, these primitive people, and they degenerated. That's what Indians became. But the western branch, you see, they maintained their racial purity, and those are the German people. So we are the high and mighty. We are pure blood, and yeah, we have family connections with Indians, but those are degenerated people. And they said actually Mahabharata was their story. They said the Germanic people were the original Mahabharata heroes. And
Mhm.
the other interesting thing is, you see, as this narrative is being built, who can raise objections to it? The our rishis, our intellectual people. So we call them Brahman. They are the custodians of our civilization knowledge. So they were telling them, hey, this is nonsense. You know, um, so it became necessary for them to destroy the Brahmin class.
Oh.
And yeah, because you see, if you have intellectual people, they will tell you, they will raise their voice against any nonsense that you might be pulling. So it became necessary for them to somehow destroy the Brahmins as a society. So they started putting out narratives like Brahmins are villains. They changed the whole narrative, and they added stuff, they took out stuff, and what you see in Mahabharata today is not the original Mahabharata, and it is all the malicious doings of the Brahmins. So they are bad people. Now this is the Aryan race theory, but Max Muller took it a step further. So more brainwashing is taking place. So Max Muller is also German. He learned Sanskrit, and he was hired by East India Company at a very high price. It's incredible how much he was paid for what he was doing. And he was stationed at located at Harvard, not Harvard, sorry, Oxford University. And he was asked to translate Rig Ved. He was asked to, I guess, create some narratives from the British point of view, British East Indian Company point of view. Now, what did he do? He came up with this theory called the Aryan invasion theory in 1850s. So he said, well, there was these Dravidian people in India. They were dark, they were primitive. These are the people who were original inhabitants of India. But around 1500 BCE, it's a very interesting date. 1500 BCE, Indo-Aryans, these Aryan people came from somewhere in the west, and they invaded these dark Dravidian people, and they conquered them, and they pushed them to the south. Okay. Now, Aryans were the one who spoke Sanskrit. They are the ones who wrote Vedas, and they forced the Indo-Aryan religion on the Dravidian people. That is the Aryan invasion theory. Now, this date of 1500 BCE is interesting. See, it all comes from the Christian belief of how the world, when the world was created, how it was created. So, the world was created in 4004 BCE, then the big flood took place, 2349, something like that. So it must have taken about 1,000 years for the world to repopulate. So, Aryans could not have, done this before 1500 BCE. So he said, okay, it looks like a good date, stick it in. Now, it's very insidious what it actually does. We trace our history going back 10,000 to 20,000 years. Ramayana is, many of us believe, took place 7,000 years, 7,000 BC. So all of a sudden, there's no room left for Ramayana and Mahabharata to develop. So it
Yeah.
must have been it must have, because if things only, aliens only came to India in 1500 BCE, when did they develop? When did Ramayana story took place? When did Mahabharata story took place? Oh, it must have taken place around, you know, around the time of Christ, and so there's a lot of foreign influence and all. The Indians must have just borrowed our stories and messed them up. So that's kind of, it's all very much, put together. It's very nicely organized. Now, why does it matter? It matters a lot, actually, Manan Bhai, because
Yeah.
if someone says Sanskrit is their language, it came from outside, then what relationship do we have with it, except that it was pushed on us, and we may have learned it a little bit, but our view is not important anymore.
Yep.
The other thing it did is it severed our exclusive claim with our ancestral land, Bharat. Now, how did it do that? It basically said, look, invaders have been coming to Bharat for a long period of time. They come, they push the other people, and they occupy. It's like a train station. You people come, people go. Enjoy while you're here, but don't think this necessarily belongs to you. Okay. So it justified their existence as a colonial rule. They said, okay, aliens came, you pushed other people out few hundred years ago. Now it's our time.
Yep.
The other thing it did is, and this is very important and fortunate and very unfortunate, it created this Aryan Dravidian divide, which never existed, and it's totally artificial. But it created a story, and some people, got to believe that they're Dravidians, and these Aryans from the north, they did bad things to us. So, it's showing up in so many different ways today, even today, in our politics, in our social dialogue, and what have you. Uh, the other thing it did was it made Brahmins a target of hate.
Oh, okay.
They were the voice of intellect. They were the people who had the knowledge to push back on the wrong narrative, but they got effectively silenced. Your view doesn't matter anymore because you've done bad things. What you say is totally biased. You're just trying to protect your hide. And it made it normal to insult our scriptures because
Oh,
they were just full of garbage. There were a lot of stuff that Brahmins had thrown into it that really never happened, didn't belong. And there was there were many scholars who were taking Mahabharata, others also, other books also, but Mahabharata specifically, they were taking it apart. And there was one scholar who concluded that only one-fourth of Mahabharata was actually original. The rest of it is all made up stories. And they were doing the same thing with Bhagavad Gita as well, believe it or not. So, so this is how narratives get destroyed and other narratives get transplanted on top of them. And one of the consequences that a lot of people don't, the connection a lot of people don't make is that in the middle of the 20th century, Hitler actually took this Aryan race theory and he weaponized it against the Jewish people and against the Roma people, the so-called gypsies, and he used it to say to the German people, "You are the superior race. You must destroy these people because they're inferior. They don't belong on this earth." And he murdered 6 million Jews and many Romani people, the Gypsies. They suffered tremendously under this. And Aryan race theory was fundamentally a weapon that he used to do it. Okay, now things change. Remember the mosaic race theory where Noah
Yeah,
had
yeah,
three sons, the Japheth and the Shem and Ham. That was their worldview of how world came into existence. But things changed in 1859. Charles Darwin, he came up with his theory of evolution. He published his theory in 1859, and suddenly it challenged the mosaic race theory. Because if we came from single cell organism, we ultimately developed into monkeys, and from monkeys you became human beings, then the mosaic race theory is all nonsense. It couldn't have been Noah's three sons populating the earth. So all of a sudden the whole Christian worldview got thrown into the trash bin. And of course the Christian world, they made fun of Darwin. They made him look like monkeys. They had cartoons all over the place, and they kept resisting this theory. And even to this day, a lot of the fundamental Christians would actually not want their children to learn about the Darwin's theory of evolution. They want them to learn the theory of creation that comes from the Bible. Now, but Darwin theory, it was very scientific. It was, they seemed very logical. A lot of people started believing in it, and it was a very serious blow to the idea of Europeans being a superior race. If everyone came from monkeys, who's superior? you
yeah, yeah.
know, but but Europeans always had this in their mind that they are the superior people. So they figured out a way to reestablish that, and they came up with something called theory of social Darwinism. So they took Darwin's theory of evolution and applied it to social structures, and they said, what is social Darwinism theory? It says each race evolves to its own level according to its inherent strengths. So different races have different capabilities. They evolve to different levels. Europeans had evolved to the highest level, and Africans had evolved to the lowest level, and Indians were somewhere in between. Okay, so the social order that they had in mind got reestablished by taking Darwin's theory and applying it to social structures. Okay, now another interesting thing that comes up: the brainwashing of Indian society continues. So now we're talking about the caste imposition of caste on the Indian society. I call it castration of Indian society in a sarcastic way to talk about this. But caste was becoming a problem, you see, for the missionaries. From 1813 onwards, British missionaries were allowed to proselytize in India, and they descended like locusts on the Indian subcontinent and tried to convert people. Portuguese had been trying to do that, of course, on the west coast, and they were using a lot of brutal methods. The English, missionaries were not able to use brutal methods, but but they were not being successful, and the reason was not the caste, but our Varna Jati system. Okay,
Yeah,
so this is a statement from Madras Missionary Conference of 1850. They said caste is one of the greatest obstacles. They called it caste, but it was Varna Jati system. They said caste is one of the greatest obstacles to the progress of gospel in India. So there are many more documents. I just want to give you one liner that
yeah,
so
yeah.
so it became and in the meantime, you have all these Max Mullers and Aryan race theory, Aryan invasion theory, and all that good stuff, being thrown around. So it became necessary for the colonizer to destroy our social structure and to impose a new structure on us, make us, actually recast ourselves in the British hierarchy. Okay, the British society and European society has always been a hierarchical society. There's someone at the top, someone below that, someone below that, someone below that, and that's how it has been. I think now liberalism is taking over, so some of that is dissolving, but that's how how European mindset was. And caste was the concept that came from actually Spain and Portugal. It was called casta, but nevertheless, it's the same idea. So they took that term, and they said, okay, we're going to make a list of castes that or classifications or castes that exist in India, and we're going to identify every person, as to which caste they belongs to. So which who is higher, who is lower in this structure. So they developed this caste taxonomy. The problem was there's this fellow called Herbert Risley. He was the director of ethnography who joined the British bureaucracy in 1873, I believe. And so he was having a problem identifying, the caste of different people or where they belong. So particularly with the tribal people. And there were a lot of people who were living in the wild because the Islamic era had pushed them out of the civilization in taking their properties. So they were basically making a living in the forest somehow, foraging in the forest. So there were a lot of people like that, and it became very difficult for the English to identify where they belonged in the social hierarchy. So he came up with this theory called nasal index. So he took some measure, where you take some measurements of your nose, and through some formula, you relate it to the evolutionary development of the person, and then you can say, okay, you probably belong here in the caste system. Um, this was inspired by the theory of social Darwinism. So social Darwinism said, different people evolve, or different societies evolve to different levels, and different people evolve to different levels. So he said, oh, how do we measure it? And he developed this nasal index to measure it, and force fitted people into different classes based on this. There were some other things like that called phrenology also was taking place at that time, which measured the size of your cranium, your head, and did something similar. But his was based on the nose. In 1871, the first census was forced on the Indian society using this new caste, list of castes, and it was very funny. I've looked at some of the lists. They have, cooking. People who cooked, they were a class. People, I forget. Yeah, tradesmen were a class. There were many, strange things like that they put in the list. So I don't know how they came up with it, but they did. So in 1871 census, they used it, and all the artisan groups, people who are goldsmiths, silversmiths, the lohars, kumhars, and all that, they got thrown into the scheduled caste category.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they couldn't figure out where they belonged in their hierarchy, so they got thrown into that. So now caste system got imposed. A lot of people don't actually appreciate this. Caste system itself is only 150 years old. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, 1871 is the first time you got exposed to it. Now I'll talk about the Varnajati system. We always had that, but it was very different.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened in the same time was this Criminal Tribes Act in 1871 was brought in. Now, what did that do? It identified number of tribal people uh, who had, by the way, some of them who had taken part in the 1857 war. You see, so they had to be punished, and so they identified a number of these tribes, and this under this act, they said these are people who are born criminal. They cannot earn a living without committing crime. So every man, woman, child from birth is a criminal, and they were not allowed to leave their territory. They had to register with the local police and visit. The male had to visit and make sure that they knew that they were still around. So it was an incredible act of cruelty that they committed. Would you believe that when India got independence in 1947, there were 13 million people who belonged in this class and who were subject to arrest if they were found outside of their territory. It's just like what they did to the native people here in North America, U.S. and Canada. Okay, so why does it matter? It matters a great deal, yeah, you see, because our social structure had a very different, color to it. It was based on something called Varna Jati system. It was very fluid. Varna is basically the idea of what is your natural tendency. Are you an intellectual person? Are you interested in studying and education and knowledge gathering, or are you interested in you know fighting, for example, defense? Or are you in is your tendency to do trade, farming, trade, and things like that? Or if none of those, then maybe you work for others. You serve the society, and you get compensation for serving the society. So it was purely based on your natural tendency. And then the jati system was really about your kinship with others, how you relate to the others in society. For example, you have, let's say, a goldsmith. A goldsmith, they have developed certain skills. They pass their skills on to their children, and their children, and they marry within each, within the community, because the customs are similar, the the expertise are similar, and that's how they were able to develop these wonderful, artistic abilities. And whether it's building temples, whether it's beautiful jewelry, and all the other things. That was the jati system. So yes, jatis were self-contained social units where people related to each other through marriage, through birth, and so on and so forth. And they would not necessarily marry outside their jati, because the customs were different. You
Yeah.
all evolve. So that, but it was a relatively fluid system where if someone, eh, maybe father is a brahmin, or he was a teacher, knowledge gatherer, and all that, but son is he's a warrior. Not a problem, you can become a warrior. The first time, I mean, we there are many examples like that. Pushyamitra Shunga, is he was a brahmin. He was actually the military commander for I forget the name of the king, but he was the grandson of Ashoka.
Mhm.
So he actually revolted against the grandson of Ashoka, and then became the king. So here we have an example of a Brahmin being a king.
Becoming yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and in the second war of Panipat, where Akbar fought against someone named Hemu. You heard of that?
yeah.
Now, Hemu, his real name is Hemachandra. Now, okay, Hemachandra, and he was actually a Vaishya. He was from the trades community. So he obviously was ruling a kingdom, um, and he was a very powerful king. And unfortunately, he got defeated. But the point is, these things happen a lot. In fact, when India got independence, out of the 560 some states, more than 400 states were being ruled by Shudras. So this is also all matter of history that people don't know. So my point is that Indian, social structure was very fluid. All of a sudden, someone became higher, someone became lower, because the caste system was thrown into it, imposed on people. And that creates problems in the society when Man bhai, if I say, look, I'm from a higher caste than you are, and I won't sit down with you and have a
Yeah.
meal with you, it becomes a problem. And that is what caste system did to the society. Now, there are examples of many people who contested their caste assignments in the courts, but they to no avail. They just the British people were just very, very insistent, and it carried on. Suddenly, there was a large surge in this, Dalit category, the social, yeah, Dalit category, the scheduled caste category, it grossly there may have been an existing social problem there, but it got grossly amplified. As I said, there were 13 million just people in tribal communities, at the when India was became independent, and there were many more who were in the so-called untouchables or scheduled caste class. So here's a statement from a fellow named Middleton. He was the census superintendent under the in the British Empire in 1921. He makes this statement. He says, "We pigeonholed everyone by caste, and if we could not find a true caste for them, we labeled them with the name of a hereditary occupation. We deplored the caste system and its effects on social and economic problems, but we are largely responsible for the system that we deplored."
Hmm.
Now, what greater evidence could you have of
Yeah.
British people messing up, the colonizers messing up with our social order? So, look at how many different ways we have, our social structure, our civilizational history has been convoluted, messed up, distorted, destroyed, and here we are today. This is my last slide, and we sit here today. Yes, we have thrown the yoke of the colonizers, and we are today. Bharat is a free country. We are a free society. We should be able to shed our colonial garb, this colonial mindset, but we are not yet able to do it because we think this is our reality.
Yep.
That's why people like me, if our conversations like this have to take place. Now, I think we have to also say to ourselves, have we what have we done in the last 76 years as a society? And quite frankly, I don't think we should be happy with what we have been able, what we have done. Um, the reason is, the when I look at the when I look at the science, the hold of English language on our society is far stronger today than it ever was. More people are going to English schools. Even those who have very strong connection with their traditions, they are sending their kids to English schools because that's how you are able to survive in today's society. That's one. So we haven't been able to get rid of that. So the
Yep.
narrative of our civilization narrative will continue to be suppressed until we are able to make English as a secondary or tertiary language. Now, colonial version of history continues to be taught, not only in Bharat, but in Bharat, of course, it's being taught, but it's being taught in the Western world as well. The Aryan race theories. First thing your kids read about is the Aryan race theory and the caste system. Those are the two things. I mean, you know, your children will come home and they might ask you about these, but that's the first thing they read. We are trying to change that, but it's an uphill battle. Um, and of course, the caste structure. One of the most insidious things we did, we brought the caste structure into the Constitution. We became independent in 1947. For the next 3 years, we were arguing over and over about what should be in our Constitution. In 1950, Constitution came into existence, and what did we do? We
Yeah.
borrowed everything. We borrowed everything that was in the British Constitution that British had given us. 10 years earlier. We borrowed a little bit from, the English Constitution, borrowed a little bit from here, there, and everywhere. And for whatever godforsaken reasons, we said, hey, let's recognize caste as an issue. If you want to destroy a concept, if we really wanted to destroy caste as a social evil, which it is, we, you know, you giving it a state official status in the constitution was not the way to do it. We should have taken it out. We should have people uh, who were disadvantaged. They should have been helped on the basis of their economic status, as opposed to on the status of what caste they belong to. And this is destroying society, because now there's caste politics. There's the vote banks and so on and so forth, that are completely uh, distorting the democratic system. So very unfortunate, very unfortunate. Now the younger generation unfortunately continues to consume this false narrative that has been transmitted to them, and then that's been hyper amplified by the social media. So these are some of the things that we continue to still struggle with. I don't know what the answer is. I'm hoping that education or conversations like this will provide some light. But you can take horse to the water, you can't make the horse drink it.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's where we sit today. And I'm going to leave today's conversation with this one thought. So Arnold Toynbee was a British historian. He studied the rise and fall of some 20 plus different civilizations, and he wrote very nice book on how civilizations rise, how they fall, and all that. But it can all be summarized in one simple sentence. He says civilizations die by suicide, not murder. In other
Yep.
words, the outsiders may try to destroy you, but you always have enough strength to recover from it. But when you accept some of the evil inside your own society, then you have chosen to commit a suicide.
Yep.
So that is the talk for the day, Manan Bhai. I want to thank you for giving me this wonderful platform of yours to reach out to people of the world. And I want to thank, of course, all your viewers, all your audience for listening to this conversation. You may feel free to share my contact information with your viewers. So if someone
Sure, sure.
has a question or feedback, um, they should feel free to get in
Contact
touch
you.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it. And Manan Bhai, I hope it has been educational to some degree.
It is educational, sir. No doubt
Yeah.
about it.